Dear colleagues, I suggest us to start. We are going to have a panel discussion. So the key title, No Strategy, No Investment. We're going to speak to different representatives, those who have money, if we may call that, state banks. We are going to have a colleague from the World Bank. We are going to have a colleague from the Single Informational System DREAM. And I encourage you, we have questions ready to go to our panelists, and then we will pass the microphone to the room, and you all are welcome to ask your questions. I will invite Julia Marcus, Vice President on Microfinancing on Kiev School of Economy Institute. So Julia, your seat is there. I would like to invite Andrzej Ubelis, Senior Governance Specialist, World Bank on Europe and Central Asia. Andrzej, welcome. Andrzej, also the task team leader for ICANN on behalf of the World Bank. Mr. Alexander Reshetnik, Director for Department of Municipalities and Regional Development. Denis Samchuk, Deputy Director of Trade Department, Macro, Micro and Small and Middle Business Bank. Viktor Nestulia, Project Office DREAM Executive Officer, and Yaroslav Tashuta, Head of Branch on Public Investment Management, Ministry of Finance. So, Julia, the floor is yours. You all have microphones, and I encourage each and everyone to be active with your engagement. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us here today. We have such a provocative panel, no strategy, no funding, or how to make decisions on public investment. It's been mentioned already that strategy, that was the document drafted just to sit in the table desk, or something like a thesis paper equivalent. Now we're going to speak how to live in a new reality, how to make a strategy to be a document that provides answers to the questions what should we fund, where and why, and also to talk how to make that strategy to be a tool, how to be clear what money should be requested for, from whom and with whom we should cooperate, and how do we exist if the national funding is insufficient for that. We have a very wide pool of experts today, professionals. We're going to speak with the Minister of Finance about financial frame, budgetary processes, as we know that Ministry of Finance see everything. The World Bank, we will speak on what is the international experience of implementing reforms on public investments, what Ukraine does successfully, what is to be improved, and maybe additional push to be given. We will speak with the banks about the tools, investment instruments, and what is to be done to make a project bankable, and also that everything would be impossible without DREAM system that brings data. Is there anyone who is not in DREAM? No? Victor sees everything, so there are no hands up. So I suggest to start, and my question would go to each panelist, and then I will ask questions from the floor. So I will start with the Minister of Finance, Yaroslav. So how Minfin sees the project preparedness, the sources of funding, what are the typical financial mistakes of communities that should be paid attention more, and how Minister of Finance can help with that? Yes, thank you. Well, I've heard a very interesting comment that ministry sees revenues but does not see the needs and requirements of communities, and maybe in that context, that reform anticipates that all the requirements and priorities would be set, so everyone would be clear about objectives, challenges, needs of every community, and also that helps to shape clear approaches and to work further with the projects as the tools that fit to a purpose to a maximum extent to ensure the expected outcomes. In this context, it's very critical to settle the cases of funding with the support of a strategist. Here we see for all the times the strategy has a bit more formal nature. Strategy is filled because that is required by the law, but in fact strategies do not play the role that they have to be drafted for. And the role is to be clear what community is aspiring, what is willing, what are the ways, what are the measurable parameters set, and according to that you can engage the state level, because the state has to be clear with that dialogue what's going on in the community, in every sphere, in every sector, and accordingly that provides an opportunity to be more specific, more profound about financial support. So through that reform we are going to meet the point when strategy becomes the working tool, not a formality, but a working tool. And to make it happen, we have to step away from that practice that Anna had mentioned today. Not to have that wish to adjust our midterm plans, but in fact, the midterm planning would be a milestone for priorities setting, according to which all the stakeholders would have an understanding where and how to proceed. So the question of funding here is not the landmark that state is going to give some money and let's set our requirements and priorities just for the sake of receiving funds. That should be an approach where community is clear with its demands and needs, and state in return would be able to meet those requirements and needs. So the key thing in a strategy is the understanding of opportunities. To do so, we anticipated this midterm planning that allows to move from the generic strategic needs to the tasks, missions, and specific priorities that could be funded. That's why we set the tentative overall limits that could be allocated to public investments, and accordingly that framework allows us to have a realistic view on things that could be implemented. That's the certain stability in funding, and also the flexibility in funding, and there is a logic to move a shift from reacting on the needs and demands. We originally, let's say, build a school and then priority been changed, then we build a clinic, but still it should be a predictable activity. In that context, during the implementation, we really faced with the challenge, and Ministry of Finance is aware that we are at war and challenges taking places constantly, and we have to respond. And public investment case may look like inconsistent, that we won't be able to introduce such a comprehensive system because the money should be planned in advance. But public investments, it's about development, and we have to understand that responding to current situation is not about development. That's the nowadays requirements, but still public investments, that's something to be planned, and communities and the state has to introduce some sort of a system to cope with that. So from the Ministry of Finance standpoint and the donors standpoint, that approach and that system is clear, and probably at the stage when this tool would be introduced for effective use, all the communities would be able to have access to that tool, and donors would be clear with the understanding what are the needs and priorities in the regions. Maybe I stepped beyond the question a little, but I really would like to set a key idea and ideology of that reform. Without understanding that the strategy is the primary source, and we have to move starting with the strategy in terms of a public investments. That's the cornerstone and the key logic. If I may to clarify, speaking about funding and looking for project finance, when should we think about? At the strategy development stage or later on? Well, project does not come from nowhere. Project emerges when at a given stage, at a given time, the need arises. The need to sort out something. It's not to build something, but rather to... I think we should check the protocol. Are we comfortable to continue? So, in terms of projects, there is a certain need for individuals in providing a given services, and the project is a next stage. It's not the original source for decision making. So the need arises first, then the view on the development comes, approach how to meet those objectives, and the project should follow the stage when the direction is clear, when advancement is identified, and then the project as a tool, the best way to meet that objective has to come. And at that particular stage, the funding may be regulated, being aware that the project has clear meeting and matching the needs and results, not building the construction, but providing expected services and functionality. So then the best way to meet those needs by a project that would lead to a financial answer to get the best satisfying way. If I may refer to international practice and find out more
with the international experience in providing public investment management reform all over the world, and including the post-war conflict countries. How do you see the progress of Ukraine now? What do you see the challenges? Are they different than in other countries which is in situation, warring situation is Ukraine now? And what we should do as a country better, or we are already good enough?
Thank you for No, well, each or client country is unique, and then it's very dangerous to put everyone in the same bucket. But I think what we, as a World Bank, we work in, have worked in numerous countries and post-conflict settings. You can name it Afghanistan or Iraq or Sierra Leone or Kosovo. And I think that one challenge we also hear from this audience today is that in these active war situations or post-conflict situations, the needs are massive and the resources are extremely limited. And the making any choices is extremely difficult. But that's where the kind of strategy and prioritization comes in play. And for international partners like World Bank, but normally there is coalition of partners like Ukraine has, and maybe Ukraine has a privilege also of having European Union in this coalition. For them, it's important to understand where do you start and where do you finish. So what are the priorities? Whether it's going to be hospital first or school first or access road first, and how it all makes sense. On the other hand, especially in these settings like in Ukraine, where you have like air raids going on and things get destroyed while you strategizing, I think they need to keep flexibility and agility is important. So, and everyone will understand that you make a plan and you will adjust it in the next quarter or by the end of the year, and maybe you initially have it just for 3 years and with a permanent adjustment, and no one can criticize, but it's still good to have this plan in place and the kind of the vision in place. And again, back to your question, is it unique for Ukraine? No, I think it's you see this pattern in many places. I can give example from my own experience working in a government in much smaller country. Before I joined the World Bank, I was the government of Latvia. Actually, during this, before we joined the EU and during the accession to the EU, and the EU countries now might look very organized, but when we started this EU accession journey and European Commission came with their big bucket of money and asked, where is our strategy? We didn't have a good answer either. Neither national nor local levels. And we had to come up with something relatively quickly and keep improving and adjusting as we went forward. But maybe 3 quick tips I learned back then and I still follow is in this strategy discussion, or when you're defining the strategy, getting to the core, what is the problem we're trying to address, is important. And definition of problem can't be we don't have money, and solution of problem can't be we get money. You should answer what is the substance of the challenge you're trying to fix. Either it's people don't have place to live, or or young people are leaving because of this and that. Yeah, whichever. And quite often you have to ask this question, what really is a problem, several times. So if people are leaving, why they're leaving? So education, why education is not sufficient? Maybe there is something else why they're leaving. Maybe there's housing. Maybe there is, you name it. Maybe just sometimes it could be a very, very basic needs which need to be addressed first to stop this trend. So this is one thing. The other thing to think about, you will need to make these difficult choices. You have identified problem, but probably you will have 10 requests for school or for this new road or for how you're going to prioritize, which one you will pick. So try to build in this selectivity, this selection criteria. It's nasty, it's not nice discussion, but you need to have it. How you will choose. And finally, none of strategy is written in office. So you can't lock a door, your strategic department or your poor territorial planner and say, sit down and write me a strategy. She needs, and head of the Hromada needs to go out and take a hit and talk to businesses, and they will complain and they will blame you for everything what is wrong, or teachers or parents or other groups. This talking and getting to the bottom of the problem is tough process, but it clearly helps the outcome of the good strategy. Thank you.
High level of insecurity announced. So incoming threat.
Thank you so much. Рухатися далі до Дріму.
So we'll move to Dream. Victor, you have a unique role in public investments. You see a lot of things through data. So your assessment of what you see through Dream. How much do they become a tool? What communities do better for strategizing? So, high-level insecurity that was announced is one drone somewhere on the outskirts of Kiev. So, I'll start from another thesis. So, Angie, thank you for remembering Latvia. And we remember often Polish experience. Like, they use 100% of structural funds. But if you have partnership with Polish cities, Romanian or Slovak cities, Hungarian cities, any countries that are part of EU, has become part of EU, if you ask them how you started this path, and they will openly tell you the first 10 years of working with structural funds, it was a catastrophe. It was a super complex bureaucracy, low level of capacity, knowledge, no market of advisors who could help you design feasibility study, no proper institutional setup. How should it be organized? But gradually, step by small step, through strategy of implementation also, they reach these indicators. And the fact that today we have the first cycle, as often it happens, like first cycle is problematic. It's a test, it's a prototype, but it's natural. So we need to move thoroughly with our strategic goal in mind and our vision, why we need all that. And in the first panel discussion, we mentioned why, because at the moment we're still towards EU and those democratic values, wherever they will be maintained. So in the context of strategy, maybe you won't like this example. If I come to my patch of land and start analyzing context of the problem, what my cabbage patch had some carrot some pumpkins, I will be able to cook whatever I have. If I come to my patch and want to make a borscht and analyze what I have, what I don't have, I will plan what I have to grow, but I have a clean vision. Like I need a borscht and not just respond to what's on my patch. So that means concrete year. So by the second year, I will be closer to my goal of cooking a tasty borscht. So that's how it looks. Many of Gromada portfolios look to me now. Not all, but many. So naturally, we come to the patch not for a clear vision, but to respond to the context and problems we're facing. And in the conditions where we are now, it's okay, it's normal. But if you look at today at the dream map data, and it's not us, we see it, everybody sees that, analytic model is available for everyone. We can see that there's 17.5 thousand different projects. Of them, 14,000 are in the portfolio, project portfolio. Why I say it's more virtual? Because we have like analyzers for hospital number 4. It's investment. It's real public investment project. Procurement furniture for 90,000 hryvnias within new Ukrainian school. We have replacement of windows, roof repairs, etc., etc. And we still haven't learned to determine what is public investment, what is capital expenditures. There are many reasons for why we don't go into analysis yet, but the fact shows us the data that so far we're too far away from actual strategic portfolios. And there are also communities like Vladimir had a great example of Chertkiv with clear, structured strategic portfolio that shows priorities. But there are also communities where in the same portfolio there are 600 public investment projects. They are virtual because there are no strategic initiatives that have to be pinned. There are much less of them. Now it's very difficult to say on this dream data whether these pips and pins they actually leave us to actual vision for your community. Why? Because dream evolutionary should have appeared a bit later. After we have the geospatial info system of regional development, the foundation of any public investment is a strategy. As of now, we've heard from Vitaly that GIS is only being implemented. Now we're also cooperating with Ministry of Development to reassess a little bit the logic of GIS and prepare for the new cycle 28-34. But we don't have a clear connection. So no more aerial incoming. So we need to connect that investment is really leads to strategic tasks in a specific strategy, because they're creating declarations. There are many communities who say it in the dream that we've created something which is task number 3 in the strategy, but there is no strategy to talk of, and it's impossible to validate the data. So that's why it's important that right now they do GIS RR systems. I'm a little bit running ahead of time, but I hope it's going to be success. With the Ministry of Development, we're talking, why do we need another interface for communities? It so happened that like you didn't raise your hands when I asked who doesn't work in a dream. Our proposal, strategic model, also should be integrated in the system, because we are all there, and SPE was born from the strategy. To trace any results, it's all part of the strategy, and it should be. And that's how we think it's much better in terms of usage, in terms of implementation, and the existing support network. But what's important to change by essence, not form. So these funds of EU don't fund terms of reference or construction. They invest. They do investment, and they do investment not into public public investment. It's development of economy or other initiatives, loans for small and medium businesses, defense, structural fund, etc. But what do they fund if they don't fund actually these communities? So statistics is what they found. They fund. What I mean is structural funds are built in such a way that they have to equalize the disproportion inside the EU and then inside of each particular country. And disproportions are measured through statistical data, starting from GDP, etc., including the number of teachers per number of students in a particular community. So now we're talking about the time to prepare and transition to that investment decisions will be made not based on whether you have documentation or not, or construction, but based on how this investment will impact the social economic development and proportionality in education, healthcare, etc. That's why the work of Ministry of Development in the context of re-evaluation of GISRR goes together with state statistics. There's a reform, state statistics, municipal statistics, passport of community, for us to provide the foundation for strategizing on the state level in terms of understanding what's happening in which region and community. So clear connection, data, strategy, midterm plan, projects, and impact. Then we will be able to do, like next year, because we're talking about strategy 2834, how many communities will they have their vision, how many initiatives in the portfolio they correspond to the strategy and bring each of us closer to resolution of statistically supported, corroborated problems, and increase possibility for investment from state budget, from international partners, and local banks, so that as a result, everyone could be able to cook a tasty borscht. So, borscht analogy is great. So, moving forward, I'm going to go to the prospects of financial institutions and to ask Denis first. Oshad Bank is a bank with a wide regional presence. You work a lot with communities. So, what are the tools that you have? What can you offer to communities? What is different from budgetary funding? What they can use? I know you have a whole presentation. Right, so I hope you can hear me. So let's do it this way. I prepared a presentation. I will not demonstrate it, all of it, but I will try to demonstrate some practical tools that you communities can use to fund the projects that currently are there in communities. And I am responsible for funding micro, small and middle business and also territorial communities. So therefore, you'll know that according to legislation, community to implement their projects, they can go to the bank to get the funding as a loan. So on this slide, I demonstrate our experience as Oshad Bank over the years from 18 to 25, how much funding was provided, how much it's in million euros, and as you can see, about 300 million euros was funded, and in total there's about 800 projects. From the period since 2022, everything stopped, but gradually we restore loans, so we help banking funding to come in and help communities. Why a Bank can be interesting for you? Because primarily we have experience. Secondly, we have quite significant level of liquidity. We can fund any project, any amount of money. And thirdly, we have the biggest network of offices. Our offices are present in all territorial communities, and I'm confident that each community present here, even if it's a village, there is someone from Oshad Bank. Or we can at least quickly come to you very quickly to meet and prepare the project for future investment and get the banking loan. Next, I want to tell you about the program with the European Investment Bank, where we fund three key areas. As the European Investment Bank believes them a high priority in the state, which is funding centralized heating, renewable energy sources, and energy efficiency of buildings. These three areas are the key areas that are being funded using European Investment Bank, and the communities that are close to front line. I put them on the list on the slide. To add to banking funding, they can be eligible for grant components, which reimburses up to from 30 to 50% of the project cost. So if you have communities now from frontline regions, take a look at the program, and it's pretty effective, and it helps you implement projects with grants. Also, in the program, there are technical consultants that for free can help you prepare terms of reference, provide an energy audit to prepare your project for future investment. The key conditions: there are no additional fees, funding from 10 to 20 years, so it's a long-term funding to decrease the budget burden. So the bigger the terms, the less the monthly payment. So a short pipeline, projects from all kinds of regions. There are requests from other regions. It's communities of Gromadas have not yet talked to us, but they very much encouraged to do so. We'll support your projects. The previous the slide that demonstrates Ukrainian school. This school was built in 1976, of the period in independence. They have not done any repairs. Children in winter have to be all in warm clothes. It has cracks, ineffective system of heating, the millions. They spend millions for gas and electricity. So how does the community design strategic plan? So replacement of windows, complex reconstruction of school with thermal modernization. In the future, it has future energy efficient design, radically decreasing payments for heating because of the sustainability, and the payments for using the loan will absolutely be paid back through savings on energy. So we can advise you on how to structure projects. So we can help you with loans. The general strategy of Gromada development. Do you evaluate it? What's the role that it plays in providing loan or not providing loan? Thank you for the question. I will answer this. We receive a lot of requests from communities, and they are like the analogy with borscht is a great analogy. And when we receive this kind of request to have a windows or heat pump, so we're trying to bring experts. We have European energy auditors, UNDP, that are structuring these projects and help them so to modernize the thermal insulation, to have a complex project strategic development, because the areas that I showed you today, they are well within the strategy of the state: decentralized generation, transition to green economy, energy efficient solutions, and so the bank is moving that way. Thank you, Alexander. Let's go to you with your prospect. Bank is strong in providing loans to infrastructure project, big things. So what makes it different as a strong banking project that can be funded from a weaker project? What do you look at? What do you take into accounting when you look at big infrastructure projects? Okay, thank you for the question. Strong, weak project, that's first of all, that depends on quality of its preparation. So we're discussing DREAM, and I wanted to talk how banks, international financial operations, and donors use DREAM, and then I'll answer your question. So DREAM for us has become additional tool of search for the new projects. If earlier we could find some projects in budgetary documents of community and program documents, now it's all public. So it's the only platform of projects where I believe everybody wins. The first is community has its needs, it prepares projects, it publishes it in the program platform. Banks, international organizations, grant givers, they look for projects that they are interested in. Thirdly, it's all done publicly, transparently. In Bank, we don't sell products, we sell expertise that helps people build their projects. So if we like some project on energy or energy efficiency, we can filter out the projects that are good. In DREAM, there is a source of funding. If out of 3 projects we understand that this is European investment, this is where we wait for money from the ministry, and this is where we attract some funding from donors. So we prioritize projects that we want. Secondly, deadlines. If we understand that the community wants to build a school in 2 years, okay, then we focus on other projects that are there. But if we talk about great, well-prepared projects, the critical question now is resilience plan that every region has. And probably today the colleagues have talked about this. When the midterm planning was done in 2025, nobody knew what's going to come after the winter, destroyed energy, etc. So that can be forecast in a country that doesn't have a war. Unfortunately, our plans have been changing, so when there are resilience plan, it's not so much time to prepare. So the bank can understand at the stage of beginning. If it's a distributed generation, it's one thing. If it's distribution heat generation, it's another story. So the key thing is that it all depends on the willingness of the community to do it and realistic deadlines, because we understand the equipment that they need now, it's not on the in Ukraine on the warehouse waiting for somebody to buy it. It's in another country. There's a deadline for it. So the roadmap, the feasibility study, so the unison together the project is done. So the bank likes when there's the project, the feasibility study. It's ideal, but we don't live in an ideal world, and there are different challenges. So As for dream and the wishes for others, we had some meetings and we've heard uh, the requirements on education. Education is important for all communities because communities, especially small ones, that had only received loans from 2023, they don't have experience how to properly take loans. So to do the terms of reference or feasibility study, for them it's something too hard. So all new things, it's not perceived at once. There is always some stage of development. So I think it's a great platform that has to be developed, and the key important thing is that the communities have a clear understanding why they need that and what's the expected effect that they get out of this. With time, when it's going to be more popular, even now on such a stage, in some projects, the Ministry of Finance can ask. When you ask for a loan, they will ask you back, is your project in Dream? And because it makes our job easier. There are public finances of the city. We understand their solvency, and on the other hand, we have a project, and so we need to make them meet. The platform itself, I think, in the future, it has to synchronize with some things that, like the Ministry of Finance issued an order on loan, and it has to be automated so that locally communities don't waste time administrating the platform itself. I think it will add value added to the platform itself. Right. Thank you, Victor. You can reflect. Thank you for this comment. It's a valuable comment and proposals because from communities we hear, like, why do we need Dream? Why do we need to upload these projects? So from the people who are funding the project, we can hear that the platform is used. Not all ideal. We have to improve a lot of things with the platform and quality, but it's a right path, and we need to keep moving. As for the proposal, next week we have a session together with the European Commission, with Ukrainian banks, so that we can collect your needs, your wishes, where Dream can be better for donors, for banks. Absolutely account for that. And the second aspect, with the Ministry of Finance, we have a clear cooperation on integration of Dream, Ministry of Finance, information system. But there's always a feedback from users, so we want to have that next week's session to have your feedback as partners. Okay, thank you, colleagues. And I suggest to go to questions and feedback from communities present. Please, questions, comments. Hello, everyone. Good evening, community. Hosha. 2 years we've worked with Dream. We go through our regional coordinators, all the stages of the strategy, papers. Also, I'm the head of the economy department, responsible for work in the Dream and public investment. So yesterday, before this meeting, we had a meeting with all of our project initiators who worked, who are part of the priority industries in the strategy. And so the colleagues asked this question. Everybody had this question. If there is no part of the PIN, what is the estimate cost of the project in Dream is done by the methodology of Ministry of Finance. All my people said that this methodology is overcomplicated, unnecessarily complicated, and they are at least some kind of coordination, some methodology assistance, because there are a lot of questions on the estimated cost of the project by Ministry of Finance and methodology. Maybe you have some department or advisor who can just, for our financial department, to provide some guidance, methodology.
Well, in fact, that's my branch is doing so, and we do receive number of calls, and we always provide explanations. If there is an issue with methodology, we tried to make it as clear and simple as possible. Maybe it's too complicated because there are some things introduced which were not being considered before, so we consider that project at different stages of it, starting with the preparation, implementation, and sometimes at concluding stages. So we see as a project all the activities necessary to be implemented for the sake of meeting the expected outcomes. And later on, we expect how the respective construction objects are going to be maintained. It's traditionally different process when we speak about capital expenditures. There is a stage of construction and that's it. And further maintenance has been calculated elsewhere, maybe at the retaining element. So that's the complexity. But I will repeat, if there are questions, we have no problems. We're not a closed entity, so please talk to us. I will add from IT point, from DREAM, and on what we're working with the Ministry of Finance to automatize the process and simplify it. There are analogous projects, EDSSB, and the database today is not ready based on the parameters introduced or inputted at the preparatory stage, suggests some limits or frames, but we work in order to fill the database with validated projects, and also we have an AI assistant in progress that has to come in probably by July time with SSP and IPCAP, and early next year we would like to educate it for Intejo, and maybe we will manage to do something in financial element. Here I would like to give some more details. It's not ChatGPT, it's not something else, it's isolated case fed purely by Ukrainian PIM context and our practice, so it would evolutionize and would not mislead in you. So that is something for us to happen, and in partnership with the Ministry of Finance, where possible to automate and simplify, so you would have access to validated data from DREAM or Prozoro or any other databases. Thank you. Novoorshitska community, Poltava region. While implementing projects, we face the need to adjust the cost of the project. There is no such a possibility. The financial specialists do not let that happen. What could be happened in that case? Thank you. Now there is such a project. If you exclude the project from databases, adjust it and include it again, that is done because you cannot modify the project. It has been evaluated, endorsed by the board. We are working methodologically with MinFin and MinEconomy and technically in DREAM. If the project is in EPP, so it would not be excluded from all the portfolios. You just click, the system presents you the things that could be adjusted inclusively with the previous data. Currently, it is impossible to adjust data with a previous TO if you're operating a new TO. So that is going to happen in the very nearest time. Thank you. Any more questions? Yes, one more question. Most likely that is going to be a suggestion. We prepared a draft project for DREAM. We passed all the stages, the capital reconstruction of kitchen in the school, and we have not received the funding. We passed all the stages, the co-funding from the local authorities being received. We meet all the requirements, but there is no funding. Is there any mechanism available or any support in allocating to us, to communities, with some explanations? Maybe we did something wrong. Maybe there was a mistake somewhere. Maybe our reasoning was not good enough. Maybe instead of financial calculations, we suggested the table of expenses. So to be aware why our project, which to our view meet all the requirements, were not included into the funding portfolio. Thank you. Absolutely supportive. So the way the public investment program works today, if there is a methodology for priority setting following your request, your interface system demonstrates this is a formula, these are 5 elements, and you got 1 point here, 3 points here, 8 points here. And at the public portal, maybe a bit of more explanation and training is needed how you utilize the tool. You can see almost every project from all the communities. You could see the priorities. You can compare and you can see the decision of the ministry who to be funded and who would not. I personally see it. It happens that funding being allocated to someone with a smaller priority than with someone who has a higher priority. That has to be reviewed. The operation has such a little ticking box. Please explain why money has not been allocated. It takes some developments. It takes time. Everyone is limited. Everyone is under pressure. On one hand, people are seeking for funding. Others have to distribute and allocate funding before the deadline comes. So at the conceptual level, it is there. This culture has to be introduced fully into life. So absolutely supportive. Thank you. Any more questions? I have a question, and from the bank standpoints and Dream and Minfin, so the war-adjusted territories who have a very special security risks, how your risk assessment and project assessment differs? Are there any peculiarities that you pay attention at? How flexible can we be in terms of planning and assessing risks for such specific territories, and what should be known to the communities? Yes, we're really faced with that question. And according to a budgetary forecast, we can plan and we endorse budgets without forecasts. The reform went in a unified way, so equal for all, but we understand that situation and we see the challenges from the war-adjusted territories, and definitely there would be flexibilities towards such territories because there is a need in a quick response, not rather planning for any many years ahead actions. So that is to be regulated somehow. And actions that require quick responses, those could go beyond the public investments, because we understand by its nature, according to the budgetary code, it's difficult to apply to those needs, because it's not about the strategy, but it's provision of a daily life and ensure the critical infrastructure operations. I'm sure we will regulate that through some explanations, and the Ministry of Finance is developing such recommendations, and we engage communities to that process. We interact with international partners to provide a clearer definition of what sits in the budgetary code and to make it easier to operate. But it sits with the understanding that there are public investments and there are urgent needs to be funded. Maybe from the bank standpoint, the risk analysis is conducted comprehensively, and first of all, the financial risks. We understand the challenges of the war-adjusted loans and reduction of budget allocations. Businesses relocate to other regions. There are cases when they stay registered in their home communities and pay taxes there. And there are cases when the relocated communities suggest it would be great to have you registered here and pay taxes here. And there are communities where revenues depend on one or two taxpayers, and you have to be clear what are those companies, what are their statuses, and whether there is any political flavor in there. There are cases when companies shut down or terminate their activities, and apparently the budget revenues are reduced, and that could be critical for the community. Then the military risk goes without saying. Of course, we have to see how close to a front line it is and whether bank is willing to cope with those risks. I have to say that we do fund cases at the frontline adjusted area. If it is 20-30 kilometers to the front line, it's probably highly risky, although there are exclusions and exemptions, especially Ukrgazbank funds large front adjusted cities, understanding that besides infrastructure, that's also the national mission and support funding communities is done by 3 major national banks. So that's briefly the answer. I will add from a Ashotbank standpoint, we speak about strategy today. So Ashotbank, when endorsed its strategy to support the national manufacturer and support of the frontline adjusted areas, it's been stated in the strategy. So bank at the senior board level decided that we will fund frontline adjusted areas and we will support those who, if not us, like that. Speaking about figures, when the war started in 2022, and here I mean not only communities but also businesses who sits in those communities, the majority of the banks, probably all the European banks, terminated funding of frontline adjusted areas. We did not do so, we continued funding, and as a result the credit portfolio was 7 billion hryvnia, now it's 30 billion hryvnia, so loan portfolio increased it 4 times. And speaking about frontline adjusted areas, Sumy region, within this region we funded 1.9 billion hryvnias loans in that particular region. So to compare that with other regions, it's in several times more than people were seeking funding in the western areas. And that demonstrates real needs of these regions, that they need support. Business, first of all, communities seek funding less from us, and you probably know better why, what are the barriers and obstacles, but I still would encourage to look at business, because looking at the businesses within your communities, probably 90% of the business, if not all, they all talk to banks, they take loans, and because of the loans they upscale their business or support their business. So this is a valuable tool for development and advancement. Thank you.
From your experience, when this kind of reform coming into reality, like public investment management reform, what helps countries to avoid so-called parallel financing for project from IFIs, from international creditors, banks, and so on? What help us to keep all in one basket, not to avoid some parallel process when we're talking about the financing?
Thank you. Yeah, I will circle back to your first question. What makes Ukraine public investment reform special is indeed like you have managed, Ukrainian government have managed basically in 2 years do things which in many countries take 5, 6, and 10 years. So meaning establishing single project pipeline, having a dream platform in place. And I think this is what partners, funding partners look for. And also this is what prevents this parallel funding. First of all, if partner comes in and says and sees that there is already pipeline in place, I have similar like banks, I have one reference point to look at. I don't have any more because World Bank did a study like 5 years ago on PIM system. There was 12 different channels how public investment projects can be requested. Now there is a single channel and everyone can follow that. Obviously, there will be exceptions. There will be partners who will come in and say, I have this specific funding and I want to support this specific territory, and you will need to deal with that situation. But I think part of that is also a discipline from the government side. Once you have the system, when you have a single project pipeline, once you have a dream, there will be lots of temptations, and both in Kiev and at the level of each Hromada, if you stick to your approach and saying, this is our pipeline, this is our strategy, this is where we want to invest, I think, and this is consistently communicated to everyone, I think that's the best approach.
Thank you. У нас питання.
Да,
Yes, there is a question here, probably to Yaroslav and to 3 banks. If the project is packaged well, calculated well, savings and benefits, but I, as a community, is unwilling to produce a strategy, will I still receive a funding without a strategy? Well, for the Ministry of Finance, which is one of the responsible ministries for the reform, we will pay attention to that to make sure that the system works. Well, there are some ways around. In time, those become a primary ways, because those could be maybe a simplistic ways. If there is a way to prepare the project and sell it, that would increase the risks to the system. However, the Ministry of Finance policy is not to force. We intend to implement this reform in very ambitious efforts, but this is a tool which is usable, and it should become the foundation for communication between all the elements. Currently, that's the standpoint of the Ministry of Finance, to make sure that the system works. I have to be honest. That's exactly the case when we popularize the preparation of the draft projects, but if this is a project for the community and it is critically important and important here and now, let's say before the heating season, and that comes as part of a resilience plan, we as a bank globally would not object if this is a community loan and there would be a request to the Minister of Finance, and Minister of Finance would say, hold on, what is in DREAM, but if that is a loan, let's say an indirect loan for a local government or a loan for some utility company, you said the procurement of some equipment, it's not a project, a public investment project, probably not, and probably that would be a purchase of a little cogeneration equipment to run a heating point. It's not a public investment. If it is here and now, this year, by the winter 26-27, it probably should be done. I partially agree in terms of emergency things which were not being unforeseen, but if we speak about something that was clear, the project does not emerge overnight from nowhere. So to an extent the need was there before, that has to be satisfied, and even the time to produce the qualitative draft project, it's also needed. So speaking about the project that appears suddenly and surprisingly, maybe we speak about things that were unforeseen related to a war, if it is an energy supply following the heat, things like that could not be forecasted and then it could be funded. But these are not a public investments. Public investments, that's about things that we know in advance and we aspire to get somewhere. So if we read a budgetary code word by word, it refers some strategic planning documents. It does not say the territorial community development, and there are several reasons for that, and Vitaly Portsenko mentioned that ministerial plans to simplify all this huge bulk of strategic planning documents that someone believes those to be. For such a transition period, there are no legal blocks and need in using any type of strategic planning documents. It's not there. But what Yaroslav had mentioned, on one hand, the culture that government tends to introduce and the logic of the structural funds, which we aspire, and Andrzej mentioned, no strategy, no investment, and in that context we expect some legal changes mentioned by Vitaly and introducing the geo-informational system for development tracking to track strategic investments, initiatives and see the outcomes. But apparently there is a transition period which we have to survive, and the main funding owners are flexible with that. Ministry of Regional Development have clear requirement. If you want to be part of project channels, you have to have a strategy first, and then we will consider your project.
Question is hypothetical. You're not aiming at a specific project. I think, general answer from our World Bank perspective would be, there might be situations when single project can go ahead, but when you want scale up, when you want, let's say, multiple projects in same territory, you will need that strategy. So yeah, you can fix emergency with that first project, but moment you want to scale up, you need a strategy in place, and without that, there's not going to be scaling up, and basically that's where you're going to get stuck. You will have that one project. And maybe, given that we're talking here about local communities, and I think also from EU, my experience with EU funds, even for this one project, there is one thing which is absolute must. it's a territorial planning. So you need to be extremely clear where you're going to put it on a map and whether it makes sense in terms of how that territorial planning, because yeah, especially developing a new object somewhere where it's not going to be accessible and it will become that bridge to nowhere, that's the biggest disaster you can have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ange.
Thank you.
Можна ще одне питання? Якщо ви знали,
If I may, one more question. Are there any more questions? So, Yaroslav, you are the only representative of the state here. So, if community would try and go around the system, not having a strategy to refer to, or would not refer to your respective ministerial orders whatsoever, is there any punishment or penalty to follow? As of now, we were working for the whole year all together. We saw the reform implementation, how that really happened. Referring to the theory and practice, we saw many challenges, subjective and objective reasons, because there was an expectation to move and advance, and not all the procedures were adhered. And Ministry of Finance currently considers possibility to include in the budgetary code some transition period in terms of applying some penalty measures for breaking procedures, but that is going to be some temporary solution, because we understand the year 2025-2026, that's a learning period for all of us. But I think that that should be supported by government level and members of parliament. We'll see if those are going to be enacted. I think from the procedural standpoint, I don't mean here a complete permission to not follow the procedure, but some omissions in preparing the public investments procedures. But let's see. We have the mindful approach, and it probably would be incorrect if in 2025-2026 someone would come and try and check whether everyone had included all the directions or project meets all the possible requirements. Maybe that would be too much. Thank you. There is more questions. Good afternoon, all. Dnipropetrovsk region, Mezhevitska community. My question is the following. We have a zero development budget, secured articles till August, that's for overall understanding. And there is a project which is a priority, education and safety, but the cost is more than the revenues that we receive per year. Of course, having heard our banks and our capacities, we don't have those capacities to take a bank loan, so it's clear that investments are critical here. So we were not been selected for a year, not been selected for two, for whatever reason we were not met. What is the fortune of those projects which were submitted but not been selected? Those are priority projects for us, but there are no financial allocations done. So maybe your advice here, what is the fortune of those submissions? That's enormous work of the people done. Projects, of course, and people working in Dream, that's enormous workload that takes time and efforts and so forth. But in a given case, there is no other way rather than attract investment fundings
But that's the situation as it is now. What happens with the projects that don't get selected? Well, probably not about the destiny of those projects, but what's the logic that we have to follow? The logic of reforms, the one who prepares the project the best, which corresponds to needs and achieves the best results with optimal sources of funding. So they have to receive access to such funding, and what you invest efforts in actually preparing projects for you, this should be understanding that the system works for you. You get the biggest scores and get the funding. If the system does not work that way, or works differently, or different approaches are used, that negates your work, and you're no longer interested, but you look for other sources of funding. With this logic, that's what we are trying to change, and we need some time. Some time has to pass till the most effective projects will be put on the top to get the funding. Specifically your case, it's hard for me to comment because together with Dream, Victor will add to this context. We've seen the portfolios. We understand there's a need to do some inventory stock taking and clean it up a little bit. So I think we will be using some things and procedures so that the projects would stay actual and relevant, so that the projects that are either don't match the criteria on the state level in terms of funding of public investments, or they have some irrelevant information or obsolete information, we need to at least clean them up. And with your project, the project needs to be relevant and it's really corresponding to the criteria, because if you just prepare the project but there is no such criteria in state programs, if they do, then we talk about the systemic work. So it's all for the idea. So maybe you can talk about it so that it gets more funds. Yeah, if I hear the main thesis, the project cannot get some banking funding for some reason. We only had budget. Community is not capable of repaying the loan. So it's a comment for everyone. I recommend to talk to the bank and work with them. Maybe we'll find some ways how to help you with this. So that's a small comment from me, because as of now, the projects and the communities that talk to us, we did not refuse any of them. We found options how to fund them. So talk to the banks as possible funding for your projects. If you say you have zero development budget and only protected articles till August, yeah, you can talk to the bank, but local loan needs approval from Ministry of Finance. And they will look into 110 and budgetary court will say no. So probably you have to work with the budget to either increase revenues or decrease spending in order to have the development budget So that's the first option. The second option, if it's a project that can be structured as self-sufficient, that will pay for itself, like a school. Okay, so that's not self-sustaining. You cannot charge money from children for giving them shelter. So, but I will not help you with these challenges. I wanted to say how I think the system should have worked. Now it's not working that way, because right now, when there's a subvention announced, if you have PCD, if you have the best structure for your project, and sometimes you're over optimistic to make it till end of the year, they will get the money, and then they fail to deliver. So that's not a good way to do it. So, and we're doing discussion when we are ready. So funding a project on PCD should do away. We don't need to prepare these design 600 claims, 5 projects with PCD that will go to correction next year. Next year it's going to be more of them, and again much more correction. So PCD is not necessary. They need it for implementation, but decision on investment has to be made not based on PCD. Secondly, my opinion, the decision on investment should not be made based on a feasibility study. So, geoinformation system, statistics, and your strategy, with understanding of disproportion, it should reveal to you whether your community, in the context of development and disproportion equalization, is the high priority. If you see that there is a huge disproportion and you don't have enough money and your feasibility study is not too good, that means we'll have to design. We have to make a decision on investment on your side to help you improve your terms of reference to prepare for investments and give you some money for implementation so that you can solve your actual challenge. Thirdly, you don't need to look who's faster and more loud, but you should look at those who really have an actual challenge, and you will see that the investment will help with this challenge. And thirdly, is the statistics of funding. We're not yet there, but now in DREAM, even on this story of previous 7 subventions that went through DREAM, we can show clearly what communities, for which projects, how many times received funding. What's the distribution of state support per capita, etc., many other factors. So in prospect, we need to go deeper into analytics in this particular part as well, because it may look like we have the champion communities who receive millions, and there are outsiders whose statistics are screaming we have problems, but they don't get the capacity. They don't have capacity to produce. So when we change these 3 concepts, then I can say that it's a healthy pin that works for a development, not for the loudest screaming PCD. Okay, thank you. Well, we can wrap up. Thank you, colleagues, and I think we have now understanding that the strategy is necessary. You need to work with strategizing. It's hard work. We're doing this during the war, recovery during the war, Euro-integration, working with donors, working with structural funds of EU. All of this is done with daily problems, with daily work with the budgets, communities, and problems. So, moving forward, I wish you a productive day, and in the end of the day, you should have an understanding of how to make the strategy, how to go back to community, what's your next step to get the funding, so that you don't have zero development budgets and all of your projects are successful. Banks were ready to fund them. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Дякую.